Welcome. If you don't know me, I'm Anna. I am a clinical psychology doctoral candidate for just a few more weeks because my dissertation defense is coming up, so I don't know what I will be calling myself in between that and internship. Maybe a psychologist in training, which I have also been this whole time. This is important today because we're actually talking about the findings of my dissertation. If you're not familiar, it's a phenomenological qualitative exploration of college women's lived experiences in hookup culture. Quite a mouthful. Particularly looking at power, so which aspects of hookup culture they find empowering versus disempowering, also taking an intersectional feminist lens, so considering other important identities to them as well, such as the role of race, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, and so forth. So I've had the findings for quite a while, but I've been putting off making this video because I was trying to get all the edits from my chair and my reader about how to sort of shift around the themes. Full disclosure, like I said, I have not defended yet, so it's possible these might be a little bit up to shifting slightly, but probably not too much. And either way, the findings are what they are, so they wouldn't be that wildly different. It's just slight different interpretations. So, the findings of my dissertation were a lot. I could have split them up into like 20 themes, but my dissertation chair strongly encouraged me to pull back, so I had 7 themes. So I will just run through all the themes and sub-themes, highlight some important quotes, and just give you a brief rundown of each of them. If you enjoyed this video, if this is something that is helpful or interesting to you, hitting like, subscribing really goes a long way. I also have a new feature, I'm told. My manager slash partner activated it for me. It's supposedly like people can give donations. If that is ever something that you want to do, like comment with the donation, feel free to do that, but no pressure ever. Like I'm not gonna be making this a regular thing where I ask you guys for money. So theme number 1 was women as objects. This was something that pretty much every single participant touched upon, which is the idea of feeling objectified in hookup culture. And a lot of them referenced how their needs and desires were erased, how they felt objectified and dehumanized, and how this led to things like ghosting and partner violence. I'm trying to use certain code words so that this doesn't get flagged or demonetized, but just know that sometimes the replacement word is just a little bit more graphic than what I'm saying. So within the theme of women as sexual objects, there was the sub-theme of a girl has to do anything for a guy. The participants spoke about how part of hookup culture was basically doing anything for a guy with no questions asked. A really powerful quote here was, "Hookup culture kind of taught me that the only way that I matter is that I'm attractive for the man. Like, I don't matter as a person, I don't matter as a woman, I don't matter as a sexual being. Those things about me don't matter. What matters about you is that you are here for this man. I've been trying to unlearn the message of you don't matter, and the only thing that matters about you is if you're attractive." So pretty hard stuff to read. I've spoken on this channel about how I feel like objectification is one of the biggest issues in our current society in the West, and this first theme really exemplifies how that's the case. A second sub-theme was nothing but a body to have sex with. So a lot of them spoke about specifically feeling reduced to the status of an object by men, only getting a certain type of attention and thinking that means that they like them, only to then find out, oh, they don't actually like me, they don't actually care about me as a person, they just wanted certain favors and pleasure from me. There was also a little bit of contrast in the sub-theme because a couple of the participants spoke about how the assumption that hookup culture is objectifying in and of itself and disempowering. They spoke about how if a woman knows what she wants and she's doing it for her own reasons, it's not necessarily objectifying and it's very empowering, and it's disempowering to say that that's not the case. There was this notion that if a woman is objectifying herself for herself, that's okay, but if another person does it, that's not okay. Which, to be completely honest with, I think has a lot of counter arguments that I would present, but that's not really the point of phenomenological research, so I will just leave it up there. And the third sub-theme within objectification was the idea of being discarded or ghosted. The reason this went under the objectification theme was because these participants often noticed that they would have these experiences with men and think that they were, progressing or at least cared about them in the way that a friend might. And then they were disillusioned to find out actually that's not the case. Like, as soon as I have what I want from you, it's goodbye, gonna ghost you. Maybe I'll pop back up with this very elaborate excuse, but either way, like, you're not gonna get your needs met from me. And then the last sub-theme within objectification was this idea of dehumanization, characterized by the title, Not Really a Person. One of the participants mentioned that because hookup culture strips the intimacy and the passion and the romantic part out of the physical aspect, it strips away the human aspect of it, which makes it very easy for you to dehumanize your partner. And there were a lot of different ways that the women in this study explained how they had been dehumanized by their partners, and I won't go into them because they're too graphic. But rest assured that there was a very clear link between this person sees me as an object and this person does not see me as a human. That makes sense because an object, is not human. You think of an object as something inanimate that doesn't have feelings, that you don't have to take care of or consider to not hurt. And this is a really important segue into the second theme, which was consent in hookup culture. Because if a person does not see their partner as human, if they see them as subhuman, as an object, why would they ask for consent? This was what one of the participants said. Why would you ask consent from an object? It's an object. So the first sub-theme within this theme was, I want something bigger than just a hookup. So the reason I put this as the first sub-theme here is because all of the women I interviewed, and it was 6, so not that many. This isn't supposed to be like representative of the general population or anything like that. All 6 of them said basically they don't want to be in hookup culture. A few of them were in committed relationships, so that was kind of a non-issue. They were kind of on the fence about whether they would even want to participate in hookup culture if they weren't in a relationship. They were mostly leaning towards no. The ones who did participate in it had either kind of closed the door on that or were trying very hard to close the door on that. So if you're painting a picture of women not really wanting to participate in hookup culture and them still doing it for whatever reason, it kind of begs the question, like, is that consensual? Is it consensual if because of peer pressure or partner pressure or societal pressure, they're still engaging in these behaviors that they don't want to engage in? Is that consensual? The second sub-theme was, it's oftentimes very hard to say no, and this was largely about coercion. So many of the participants spoke about feeling coerced into participating in hookup culture, feeling like everyone's doing it. If you're not doing it, it's not considered fun or cool or attractive. If you're in a relationship, that's kind of weird. And so it becomes this pressure, like you're kind of ostracized or cast to the side if you are not participating in these behaviors. The third sub-theme was hookup culture really blurs the lines of consent, which kind of speaks for itself. There was this idea that hookup culture in and of itself is characterized by not a lot of consent and non-consensual experiences that, again, I cannot get into in this video, but the percentage of participants that disclosed having those types of experiences was consistent with the data census on what we know college women tend to experience. Another sub-theme that I was completely surprised by was, that's too old for me, which relates particularly to age-related abuses of power. So about half of the participants spoke about some of their very first experiences in this culture. We're talking like 16, 17 years old, were with older men, not like old, but like older, like early 20s. And that looking back in retrospect, that they think that's really creepy and really disturbing because they were practically children back then. And these experiences were some of the worst that they'd ever experienced, some of the least filled with consent, some of the most abusive that they had experienced, the most traumatizing. And so that's something interesting, is this idea that women might be pushed into this by people who are taking advantage of a power differential. Another sub-theme was that there's a lot of art culture in universities. No surprise there. This was confirmed by previous research as well, that hookup culture and our culture kind of go hand in hand on college campuses, and that college campuses do not really take these allegations seriously. And the participants express a few ways in which that happens. And then also really linked to this is alcohol plays a huge role, which is a theme all about substance abuse and how that links to the last thing I just mentioned, which is that, okay, hookup culture, our culture, and binge drinking culture, all three of them go together because people experience hookup culture primarily through getting intoxicated, and getting intoxicated unfortunately puts people at risk of experiencing non-consensual stuff. And the participants spoke about a lot of different ways in which alcohol facilitates casual experiences, such as lowering people's standards, making them more stimulated, making them feel like they can kind of excuse what happens the next day under the guise of, oh, I was just drinking, I don't know why I did it. And they also spoke about how sometimes men try to intentionally intoxicate women because they think it'll increase their chances of a hookup happening. The third theme was communication in hookup culture, and this one was characterized by the first sub-theme of men don't even care to just be honest with you. So there was this notion that men, for some reason, are unwilling to be honest with their partners. That even when directly asked, hey, are you involved with someone else? I need to know for my personal safety, that they said, oh, that's weird, like, why do you want to know that? So either evaded the question or flat out lied and led on their partner. There were a few really interesting stories in there about these participants saying like they were hooking up with someone for a long time, things seemed to be progressing, and then out of nowhere they found out that this person is with someone else or getting into a relationship with someone else or has other women's stuff at his house, and that they felt very disillusioned and hurt by that. The second sub-theme was that men play with people's feelings, and this particularly related to the assumption that men are doing this, they're being dishonest, particularly because they want to manipulate their partners, particularly because they want to play games, they want to act like they like their partner and then kind of catch them off guard and kind of change up on them. There was also this notion of gaslighting from their partners. One participant said, I feel like in hookup culture, men will make you feel like your feelings are not valid. They will literally make you feel crazy. Like, am I just imagining this connection? And also, a lot of them were saying like, you could have just told me from the start, I just want something casual. I might have been down to do this, but instead you're concocting this whole story where you just happen to fall off the earth because of X, Y, and Z reason, and now you're coming back, and then you just pull the same stuff all over again. And it's like, why do you do this? Like, why are you trying to manipulate me? Why are you trying to play with my feelings? You're making me feel like shit. But interestingly, another theme was a lot of girls are scared to communicate, which is also consistent with what I've personally seen on college campuses. So it's not just that men don't communicate, women don't communicate either for seemingly different reasons. And the reason for women is that they want to be with this person, but they're scared that if they communicate that, they'll be labeled as crazy or they'll push this man away and he won't want to do anything with them anymore. One participant said they would still rather have a little part of them than not have them at all. And that is word for word what I read in this recent book that I think I might do a video on, Women Who Love Too Much by Robin Norwood. It was okay, not great. That is literally word for word what one of her clients said. So I think it's so interesting that like 40 years later, women are still experiencing the same thing in just a slightly different context. And there's this desperation, this idea that I love you, I want to be with you, but you're not giving me much, so I will just settle for breadcrumbs. Another quote was, it hurts for me to just hook up with you and not do anything else. But because that's the only thing you're giving me, I'm just going to continue because I just want to be around you so much. Really heartbreaking. There was a participant who said, women think they can change men or make them fall in love even if he's not interested. I think there's that hope that like, oh, if I keep seeing him and if I keep entertaining him in this way, maybe he'll end up liking me and drop the other girls he's talking to, and then we can become an actual thing. But most of the time, that has not worked out from what I've seen. Theme 4 was the social effects of hookup culture. First sub-theme was shaming, and this was kind of split into two trains of thought. One group of participants said that Shaming is absolutely integral to what hookup culture is. The other group said that actually hookup culture has made it less taboo for women to be hooking up, and that actually it's made progress in that way. So the first camp said they've heard a lot of casual shaming remarks about themselves, about others, just little looks from men, from women in slightly different ways, and that it's not the same for men, not at all. Whereas the other camp said that actually they don't really see shaming too much, at least in their circle. They don't really think it's much of a thing anymore, which I think is interesting because it kind of invalidates the first group's experience. And like, sure, like they haven't seen it in their circle, like that's valid. They haven't seen it, they haven't seen it. But there's kind of this notion that, oh, because I don't see it happening, it must not be happening still. And unfortunately, I think a lot of women in hookup culture will tell you it's absolutely still happening. And maybe you're blessed enough to not have access to the kinds of things people are saying behind closed doors, but boy, are they saying some stuff. Another social effect of hookup culture was social alienation, particularly when the person was a friends with benefits and it ended. It made it really awkward to be in the same friend group, and just hookups in general made it less likely for people to hang out with their friends because they just wanted to meet up with this one person. Another sub-theme was that women are fighting over the same tired little group of men. So this idea of female competitiveness. A few participants spoke about how there is this strange competition between women for like male validation, male attention, and that it makes it really difficult to navigate hookup culture and to navigate friendships, and that it's a little bit cringe for some people to hear this, and that the higher women to men ratio is something that makes this worse. It's because, you know, like this says, it's the same little tired group of men, so they get to create what the culture looks like. This is again confirmed by past research, which shows that at colleges where women outnumber men, men get to create the culture, and usually that's hookup culture. And then at colleges where men outnumber women and women are the ones who get to determine what they want the culture to look like, it's more in lines with dating. And lastly, another sub-theme was mistrust of men. So there were participants who said, you know, like, I don't trust men anymore. When people are nice to me, I kind of doubt that. I wonder what game they're trying to play, what joke they're trying to play on me. And unfortunately, that's a pretty sad aspect of hookup culture. Fifth theme, emotional effects of hookup culture. The first sub-theme was basically hookups suck. They are terrible, horrible, detestable experiences, painful emotions, negative emotions, so to speak. You know, my stance on emotions, they can't be particularly negative or positive. They either make sense for the situation or they don't. So some of the things women said were that hookups are emotionally draining, pretty terrible for me, can really mess with your mind a little bit, make people emotional, kind of suck, horrible, I hate it, detestable, it's not great, and I 100% would not recommend, made them in a really bad state emotionally draining, caused a lot of trauma, difficult, uncomfortable, felt rejected by someone that you see all the time, a huge insecurity boost, being treated horribly by men, or just feeling like you're nothing but a body to have sex with, not good enough, not feeling confident, a risk on your self-confidence, always feeling like shit, mood worsening in the immediate and later future, and a sense of regret. Versus hookups as a fun confidence boost. A few of the women said that hookups can be something that elicit positive emotions, so that it can be fun, that it can bolster women's self-esteem through male validation though, which we'll get to in a second. And then there were the people that said, well, it's ambivalent, like it's a mix of positive and negative. It's a mix of painful and pleasant emotions. I liked it and I didn't. Do I support it? Do I not support it? I basically don't know. Theme 6 was the role that the pandemic played on hookup culture. There were two camps here. One camp said everything stayed completely the same, nothing changed. The other camp said hookup culture was basically non-existent for a while, and the pandemic really changed the way that the environment looks. So in the first camp, some of the participants said that college students are the sort of population that don't care about the pandemic. And that kind of makes sense, because if you think about the nature of hookup culture, it is sort of this hyper individualistic, personal, individual pleasure value system. That's kind of the value that research shows they take on sexual health and safety as well. And so it's not altogether surprising that they would be taking risks with their respiratory health as well. Then the second group of people said that actually hookup culture changed a lot, that it was practically non-existent because of the pandemic, that people were no longer seeing random people, but rather sticking with friends more so, that made it a little weird to interact socially, that people would rely more on dating apps rather than going to parties, going to social events, that hookup culture really died down, that it basically stopped, that it became very, very slow moving, that it was more of a process of like planning out how to meet as opposed to just meeting and getting on with it. And that it made a lot of people realize, because of the distance, that they actually had feelings for the person that they had been seeing before the pandemic hit. This one is quite a handful because there are a lot of different sub-themes. The first sub-theme relates power, gender, and hookup culture. The second one concerns power, race, and hookup culture. And the third one concerns power, sexual orientation, and hookup culture. So starting with gender, there was this idea that men have all the power in hookup culture. A few of the participants said, men have the power, it's easy, it's simple. A second sub-theme was hooking up actually empowers women by giving them validation through how men see them. And there were a few participants that said, you know, I feel like that's not the best way to gain self-esteem is through external male validation. Personally, I completely agree with that. I think that is very fleeting and bound to cause serious issues further down the line. A third sub-theme was it's only empowering when it's your decision. This idea that if it is truly your autonomous motivation guiding taking these actions, then that can be very empowering for you. If it's like one participant said, like girl boss moment, whatever. Loved that. But that if it's not, if there are external pressures being put on you, if you're trying to conform to a certain culture, then obviously that can be pretty disempowering. Because internal empowerment by definition means following your personal agency, following what you want to do with your life, not what other people want you to do. Then there was a theme that actually hookup culture allows women to feel empowered by sort of switching the roles up, by throwing men a curveball. And this is when basically they discard the man first and the man is shooketh. Again, not sure how sustainable or productive this is in the long run, but they said that's a way that women can find empowerment in hookup culture. Then also there was the notion that the person who's more involved holds the least amount of power in the relationship. They're the more willing to do a lot of things to try to get that person's attention. They're trying to get them into a relationship, so they'll basically do whatever they want. And that this mostly happens to women rather than men. An interesting quote here, one person said, if you were the one in power, to have that imbalance, I think you would have to sort of be compassionate, be considerate. And I think for me, when someone is compassionate and considerate, it just ends up being a relationship. Doesn't that say it all? Then there was a sub-theme about hookup culture and feminism. The long story short, some women said hookup culture is feminism in and of itself. Some women said that hookup culture is extremely anti-feminist and objectifying and dehumanizing and victimizing. And some said that, you know, feminism isn't really necessarily linked to what women do with their bodies, and I think that was a very astute observation. Moving into power, race, and hookup culture, there was this idea of guys only want to be with white girls, that both white women and women of color in this study, with the exception of one, said that they had seen prejudice against black girls, that they had seen white guys not respecting them, not wanting to hook up with them, despite them being, you know, as beautiful as possible. Like, they were just not about it because of racist attitudes. Partly because of this, there was this notion of within groups, like people only tend to hook up within their racial or ethnic group because for these participants, the women of color said that, well, I don't feel safe hooking up with white men really because I already know there's like a double power differential there and they don't always respect me. And they also confirmed that actually even within their own communities, hookup culture was very rampant. And there was one participant who said, well, hookup culture is kind of the same, whatever race you are. I feel like race doesn't really impact it much. And so that was her experience. And then the last sub-theme for this was power, sexual orientation, and hookup culture. So there was this idea that hookup culture does predominantly promote heterosexual, heteronormative hookups. Like, yeah, it does allow the freedom to kind of explore and branch out from that, but Basically, it is heteronormative. Even the women who did not identify as straight, which were like half of the women, even they, throughout the interviews, were only talking about male-female hookups for the vast majority of the interview. So it was really interesting that when you ask college women about hookups, they primarily think about straight hookups as opposed to hookups more broadly. There's also the notion that people in sexual minority groups are kind of in their own subgroup, and then the straight hookup culture is its own straight bubble. So again, some segregation between the two groups. Women's experiences with lesbian hookups were very interesting. They were described as very different from their experiences with men. One quote is, "It's just different when it's with women because you could just be more communicative and more direct, and that's literally all we want. So when you just have that steady flow of communication, for me at least, the hookup culture is not too bad. Like if I'm just like, I just want to hook up with someone today, that's all, and they're like, I agree, and we just agree, and that's it. Like there's no issue, there's nothing. And if they're feeling some type of way, I know they'll come to me to talk to them, and vice versa. I've never had a bad experience with a woman." They also said that it can be hard to understand men emotionally, and that makes it a little easier to connect with women emotionally. There was the notion that women who hook up with women do tend to get more attached. And it was interesting, there was one participant who had hooked up with a trans woman pre-transition, and she said that she would say things that just sounded like they came out of a sexist man's mouth. "I could tell we were raised differently in regards to our gender." It just kind of seemed like she didn't see the same discomfort and humiliation as it was for me, like being uncomfortable with that sort of stuff. It seems like she didn't get it the same way. So that was really interesting that this person had an experience with a trans woman who, because of being brought up with like masculine ideals, still did not really understand the shaming that she as a cis woman had experienced and endured and continued to endure. So those were my results, the findings at least. I'm not gonna go through the discussion as well because who has time for that? And honestly, it's just a whirlwind in my mind right now. So I really hope that this was interesting to you. Personally, it's fascinating to me. If this is something that you enjoy, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you want to see more of my content, and I will see you soon.